Several have asked. By the way, it is good to be back. We've been away for about 7 or 8 days, and some asked, "Were you fishing?" Well, of course. All Jesus' best disciples are fishermen, and so yes, that's what we were. That's what I was doing. Anyway, we go to a lake in upstate New York, and it has poor internet reception, and the cottage has no TV. So we have no internet, no TV, and we have the lake, and we have sunshine. And so all that to say, my tank is full. Did you pack a lunch? And so anyway, well, this week we're starting a new series, and we're simply calling it This is the Way. Okay, and here's the plan. We kind of got into this earlier in the year, and I'll explain here, but we're going to go verse by verse from John 14. So if you haven't turned there yet, please turn to John 14. And these are the words of Jesus to his closest followers, many of them fishermen. And John 14 begins what is known as the final discourse of Jesus, and it's also sometimes known as the upper room discourse. And there's just a handful of discourses of Jesus in the Gospels, but this one is different than all the others because this discourse is not given to a large crowd. Okay, it's not made in some public setting. Instead, this is coupled with chapters 15, 16, and 17. 15 we did earlier in the year is Jesus' longest discourse, but perhaps more importantly, it's certainly his most personal one. Why? Because Jesus knows he doesn't have much time left here on planet Earth, and he knows the disciples are filled with a lot of uncertainty, and he knows that there are challenging days ahead for them, and so it for sure is going to feel overwhelming to them. And so he wants to kind of prepare them for the struggle that they're about to embrace. And of course, he loves them and he wants them to be ready for what they're going to have to deal with. And so I want us to study this together. Actually, when we were doing John 15 earlier in the year, I thought, man, I wish I had started with John 14 and just done this whole thing. And so we're kind of coming back to it. But I want to study this together because I think of some of the same things that he said to them are some of the same things that he would want to say to you and I today. For he wanted his followers, his closest disciples, to have the confidence and the courage to stay on mission. Okay, so again, Jesus, he's not speaking to big crowds here. This is taking place in the upper room, and most of us, we know the scene, but to refresh that picture in our minds, Jesus has just washed the disciples' feet, and Judas has left now to go betray Jesus, okay? And Jesus now looks around the table, and he sees all around the table these disciples who have left everything to follow him. And over the last few years, they have gone everywhere that he went. And it's hard in this moment because he's getting ready to go somewhere where they can't go, somewhere where they can't follow, at least not yet. Okay, so this is the final discourse. It begins in chapter 14 of John, but to really understand the tone and the emotion of it all, you just kind of have to pay attention to the conversation that leads up to it. And so to help us get to that place, get the context, let's go back in our minds to John 13. It's a very famous passage where we read in John 13 where Jesus is speaking to his disciples, and again, with great affection, he says to them in John 13, "My children, I will be with you only a little while longer." Okay? So Jesus is talking, if you hear that, you're going like, well, Jesus is talking to his disciples like a parent would talk to their children before leaving on a trip, okay? Maybe a road trip, okay? And Jesus seems to anticipate their questions, and their questions would be similar to that, I imagine, that a child might ask a parent, and that is, can I go too? Can I go with you? Can I go too? And the disciples want to know that, well, because that kind of was part of the agreement. We leave everything to follow you, and wherever you go, we get to go. And so Jesus anticipates the question, and he says to them, look, I'm leaving now, and where I'm going, you can't come. But he's going to help prepare them for what they need to be about while he's gone. In fact, parents, we do this today, don't we? Like if you're a parent and you've had to leave children for a period of time, most certainly one of the conversations that you're going to have with your kids before you leave is you'll have a conversation that begins with this phrase, while I'm gone, right? This is what's expected. While I'm gone, here are some things that you need to remember. And that's what Jesus does in John 13, verses 33 and 34. He says, where I am going, you cannot come, but a new command I give you, love one another. Now, a new command, right? That's what he says, a new command. Now, notice what he doesn't say here. He doesn't say a new suggestion I give you or a new idea. He doesn't say a new recommendation or new proposition. No, he doesn't say any of those things. Instead, he says this is a new, what, church? Command, yeah. So what's up with that, church family? Does that sound accurate to you? To love one another is a new command. Like it's not been around before. Doesn't the Bible teach this idea of loving your neighbor all the way through the Old Testament as well? And doesn't Jesus know that? Well, yeah. When asked one time by someone what the greatest command is, Jesus said, the greatest command is to love God with all your heart. And the second greatest command is similar in that you are to love others like yourself. So yeah, Jesus certainly knows all that. And so what about this new command to love one another? What makes it new? Okay, here's what makes it new, because he goes on. Love one another, he says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. So what makes it new is that Jesus with his life gives us a whole new way of living out that kind of love. And it's not the what of the command, that's new. It's the how you're going to love, okay? And what Jesus shows us, he shows his disciples what it looks like to love this way. Now just think for a moment about the disciples that are listening to this, okay? Because I think they know what Jesus means when he says it, okay? As I have loved you, you must love one another. I think they know what he's talking about. Because as they're listening to these words, they're listening to these words with freshly washed feet, right? Like just moments before, Jesus, the Son of God, had knelt down on his knees and humbly washed the dust and the dirt and the grime out between their toes, okay? And in those days, they walked everywhere they went, so their feet were nasty, okay? And so he just had done this. Jesus had just served them in such humility, and so they knew what he meant when he instructed them to love one another. The point is, he loved with the kind of love that puts others' needs ahead of your own. It's the kind of love that considers others that better than yourself, okay? It's the kind of love that doesn't insist on having your own way. It's the kind of love that will put the good of a relationship ahead of my own rights, okay? And then in verse 35, Jesus says, if you love one another this way, the way I have loved you, if you do this, by this, everyone will know that you're my disciples, if you love one another, okay? In other words, that's how people will know you're my followers, is by the way you love one another. Now, just for fun, I got to thinking about this, just for fun, and I'm guilty of this, so I'm like on pretty much every account here, but just for fun, for a moment, I thought it'd be fun. Let's note what Jesus doesn't do. Like Jesus doesn't say, hey, I brought a bag with me, and inside this bag I've got some stuff. And what I got in there is I got a bunch of fish, like these little Jesus fish that you can put on stuff that way people will know you're one of mine, that you're a follower. I got some little fishies, Jesus fishies you can put on stuff, like your car. Well, they didn't have cars. And inside this bag I also have some bracelets, that say, WWJD, okay, on it. And that's just kind of a way that you can let people know you're one of mine, right? And okay, fun moment over. Anybody else besides me do any of that? Just me. Okay, there we are. We got a few honest people. Yeah, fishies, WWJ. I actually had them in Spanish, Que Hasa Jesus. Took a whole bag full to the Dominican Republic and passed them around and said, this is the way. Yeah. A whole bag full. Okay, I still have one actually in my workshop. It's Que Hasa Jesus, same thing, WWJD. But no, Jesus didn't do any of that. He doesn't hand out fish and bracelets as the way, okay? The way that people will know that you're my followers. No, the world would know that they're his followers. He says, this is the way, by the way you love. And Jesus doesn't say to them in those final moments, hey, look, everyone will know you're my followers by your biblical interpretation. Okay, so guys, what I'm thinking here is, I'm thinking that all of you should disagree about all kinds of unessential things and debate into significance the slightest difference of opinion and interpretation. And I'm picturing dozens and dozens of different denominations where you constantly argue and fight with one another about who's right. And that's how the world will know you're mine. Okay? He didn't say that. That wasn't the plan. That wasn't the way. Okay? No, because Jesus didn't ever say that. And Jesus didn't say, hey, the world will know you're my followers by your moral superiority and your self-righteous indignation. He doesn't say that. He doesn't say, hey, guys, here's the plan. Here's the way. I want you to work on what I'm going to call your sign of disgust. You know that one? I need to work on it. It needs work, okay? Anyway, Jesus didn't say, I want you to use that as often as possible so that when your coworker comes in from a party the night before and is hungover and starts glorifying the party, you can use that sign of disgust. And that way he'll know you're my follower, right? Okay? And so because the way forward is, well, people will know you're my followers by the way you act better than everybody else. Okay? Speak to me, church. Is that what Jesus said's the way? No, that's not the way. He didn't say that. And Jesus doesn't say, everyone will know you're my followers by your political perspective. You'll know by the candidate. They'll know by the candidate that you back and by the vote that you cast and the way the world will know that. That way they'll know you belong to me. No, that's not what he says. Jesus doesn't say, oh man, we're going to go to preaching to meddling on this one here. Okay, but here we go anyway. Okay, Jesus doesn't say, here goes. Jesus doesn't say, everyone will know you're my follower by your posts and comments on social media. Yeah, he doesn't say that one. Okay, like he doesn't say, so here's what I want you to do, guys. I want you to spend hours and hours scrolling through social media, criticizing as much as you can, and being as disagreeable as absolutely possible, because that's the way people will know that you're my followers, by the way you constantly criticize and complain. And Peter was like, well, Jesus, should we leave posts and comments about things we know nothing about and towards people we don't personally know? And Jesus was like, absolutely, Peter, because that's the way. Okay, be as negative and judgmental as possible, even when you have no idea what you're talking about. Now, you might think that's the plan if you pay attention to the church these days on social media, but listen, friends, I know you know this, okay? But that's not how the conversation went. Jesus said, the world will know you are Christians by your what? Your love. That's the way. That's the way. It's by the way that we love each other. So this is going to be kind of a continual theme through the next few weeks. We're going to be challenged in this final discourse of Jesus. I just thought this would be a really good season to do this, right? You know, because it's going to pick up, right? And we can get caught up in it. So we're going to keep referring to this, be challenged to this final discourse of Jesus in John 14, to love each other in a way that I think will make us all stretch a little bit. Okay, it's going to make us stretch a little bit because during this season, it's been going on for a time now, this season where there's just a lot of division, a lot of build-up tension, a lot of criticism, and everybody's so sensitive and defensive. But the good news is that in the middle of all that, we have this great opportunity, I think, this great opportunity to stand out by the way that we love. Not by the way we argue, not by the way we condemn, nor the way we preach or the way we vote, not the way we debate or demonstrate, but by the way we love, because Jesus said, this is the way. Listen, friends, we live in what we often hear, you just saw it every week, you see it, cancel culture, where somebody does something and they got to go. And where shame and condemnation and guilt is the thing of the day, it rules the day. But as we follow Jesus, we're not called to be part of cancel culture. We're called to be cross culture, okay? The cross culture cancels out. What it cancels out is shame and guilt. And how it does it is with love and grace. And it's our great opportunity to demonstrate that. But honestly, it takes foot washing, and it takes humility. Listen, friends, and I'm talking perhaps mostly to our men right now, because as men, like I used to be one, right? And used to sit out there where you were, and as men, I'd hear that kind of talk back in the day, and we're more prone to put up a good fight. Like, I think men just are more prone to put up a good fight, and that's okay, because Jesus made us to be protectors, ready to fight and defend, especially the truth, in our families, and for some more than others, this is their way. So perhaps you're thinking right now, oh great, here goes the preacher man again. He wants us to turn the other cheek because we're compelled to love one another. Well, no, I'm not telling you to love. I'm not telling you that love is the way. I'm telling you Jesus commanded you that love is the way, right? Jesus said to love your neighbor as yourself, and so that's our motivation. Our motivation is always love. You think you're tough? Okay, here's tough. Even when it's inconvenient to ourselves, we still want to love. You want to try tough? That's tough, okay? Jesus said, if someone asks you to carry their pack 1 mile, you carry it too. Tough, Okay? Not only that, as Christians, we're called to humbly and willingly serve and submit to our governing authorities. The man, we're supposed to submit to the man. And unless we've been asking to do, unless the government's asking to do something contrary to what God's told us to do, has commanded us to do. I mean, Romans 13 is really clear about this. And so look, I know these days it's really easy to criticize leaders, but that job's not easy. I don't know which one it is, but none of them easy. And listen, as followers of Jesus, one of the ways we love is by praying for and submitting to those that have authority over us, as long as it doesn't contradict what Jesus has taught us to do. So in verse 36, Peter has a question. He says to Jesus, "Where are you going?" Like, Jesus, I'm leaving now. And Peter says, "So where are you going?" And Jesus replied, "Where I'm going, you cannot follow now, but you will follow later." So, if you just kind of visualize this scene, Jesus is in the upper room. He's broken the news to the disciples that he's going to be leaving now, and he looks around the room, and he can see that they're, kind of confused because there's just a lot of that they don't understand, and they won't for a while. I mean, and they've got to be disappointed. I mean, the way forward for them, well, it just looks a lot different than they thought it would be and what they hoped for, and they've got to be a little bit scared, and they're uncertain for sure. They don't know what they're supposed to do now, and they don't know where they're supposed to go now. And so Jesus just looks around the room, and he sees, what you and I often, I think, see these days, right? What you and I see these days is there's a lot of people who are uncertain. There's a lot of people who are troubled. And some of those troubled people are followers of Jesus Christ. And so as Jesus looks around this room at his closest disciples, what he sees is he sees people who are troubled. Okay? And so this is where the final discourse kind of picks up in John 14, and it's his final words to his faithful followers. And so I want to kind of invite you into the upper room. I mean, there's a seat at the table for you, right? I mean, like for all who feel overwhelmed and uncertain when they think about the future, and for all who feel confused and disappointed and discouraged and defeated. So for all of you who are troubled, have a seat. Because there are some things that Jesus wants to say to you, because he wants to show us the way we're to go from here. So as we begin this series entitled, "This is the Way," as we begin our journey with the words of Jesus in John 14:1, where he says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled," okay? Do not let your hearts be troubled. Hear it personally when he says that, okay? I mean, because he's speaking to us. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Now, whenever I hear a command like that, there's part of me that just immediately says, well, it's not like I want to have a troubled heart. Like I didn't ask for a troubled heart. I didn't really want a troubled heart. I mean, I want to have a heart that's peace. I don't want to fall asleep at night thinking about the plans that I had for the future that may have changed because a catastrophe has hit. I don't want to wake up in the morning and feel overwhelmed by everything that's happening in the world around me. I don't want my heart to be troubled, but my heart's troubled. Okay, and most of us have lived a long enough life. We know we know that happens, and plans for the future get uprooted, and at times the world around us seems to be overwhelming. But hear these words of Jesus again, because Jesus says, with tenderness and compassion, he says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." So just this week, this is the challenge this week, and I'll get to it again later, but the challenge for yourself this week is, because we get a lot of messages throughout the week. I mean, a lot of people talking at us, just repeat this to yourself. Every time your phone gives you news update, remember John 14. Like, does your phone do that? Like, breaking news. Why is everything breaking news? But it breaks all the time. And you see that headline, just go, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." Right? Not today. Every time your words, you hear words like new cases, presidential election, new price increases, unemployment rising, just close your eyes for a moment and hear the words of Jesus. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Well, okay, but how do you do that? Well, I'm guessing the disciples were thinking the same thing, right? Like how are we supposed to do that, Jesus? You're going away, and how are we supposed to? Well, I mean, nobody wants their hearts to be troubled. So doesn't that mean, Jesus, that you need to change my circumstances and solve my problems and make things better? Doesn't it mean like when you should say like, let your hearts not be troubled because I'm going to fix it? Let your hearts not be troubled because I promise you everything's going to. You ever notice people say it's going to be okay? I mean, that's what everybody says. It's going to be okay. Jesus doesn't say that. Okay, he doesn't make them any guarantees about life. He doesn't make any guarantees about the road that lies ahead. He just says, do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. And the word believe there is also translated as trust. So you could say, trust in God, trust also in me. And it's the idea of putting all your weight onto something, just putting all your weight on there, okay, like, leaning on it, okay? And, that reminded me, and you've probably heard this too, a lot of skeptics and cynics talk about Christianity. When they want to talk down about Christianity, they'll say, it's a crutch. You ever hear that? That Christianity thing, that's just people that need crutches, okay? It's something you lean to get through life. They have to lean on that to get through life because, I guess we're not strong enough to get through life on our own. And so we have to lean on that, okay? Anybody else ever hear that? Does that irritate you? Yeah, more than a little. Used to make me irate. Okay, what do you mean? You're saying I'm weak, okay? And now that I've lived for a minute or two and been in ministry for 20-some years and seen most everyone need someone to lean on in a season or two, I think maybe they're right. I think maybe they're right. That our faith in God and Jesus is a crutch. And to that I say, thank God and thank Jesus, my Lord and Savior, right? Thank, because I don't know what I'd do without. I mean, did you ever hear that one at a funeral? People, I don't know how people do this without Jesus. Well, what are you doing with Jesus? Oh, you're leaning on him, right? I think they're right. And so the question that we want to really think about is, what are we putting our weight on? What are we putting our trust in? Some of you think, maybe you used to think, preacher, I'm pretty strong. I don't need a crutch. I don't need something to put my weight on because I can hold myself up. I support my own weight, and that worked a long time, right up until it didn't. Or maybe you put your weight on money and financial security, and you thought, don't let your hearts be troubled because your income is high and your portfolio is diverse. And that's the sort of how you lived. That's what you put your weight on. Or maybe you put your weight on your belief in your marriage or in your family, and they're the ones that you lean on. Well, that may be true. Like they're the ones that you lean on so you can keep moving forward, but it's only a matter of time until they disappoint you or the pressure you're putting on them to hold you up becomes too much and the whole thing begins to crack. Or maybe you put your weight on scientific advancement or political solutions. Look, the list could go, it could be a really long list of what we lean on, right? But the question is, what do you put your weight on? What do you believe in? Because if you think that's the way you're going to move going forward, I got news for you. It's not. It's not. This past week, well, actually, it's been 2 weeks now. I wrote this sermon before we went away, so it's been 2 weeks. But 2 weeks ago, I was making a cup of coffee in the Keurig coffee maker. Like, we have Mr. Coffee for major coffee in the morning, and then we have Keurig for 1 cup later on in the day. Anybody else? Yeah, only in America. Right? Okay, anyway, I made it in the Keurig because I was just going for 1 cup of coffee. And what's it take, like 60 seconds? Yeah, maybe. And until it was done, I had forgot about it. Like I'd moved off to probably get a cup and forgot I was looking for a cup. And I went in and I sat down in the living room, and Margie, my wife, watched it all happen and knew what was happening and said absolutely nothing. Okay? She watched kind of amused, and then after what was apparent, a long enough length of time to prove that I had totally forgotten, she said, "You going to drink that cup of coffee you just made?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, it happens a lot anymore." And she's just laughing up a storm, and usually I try to, brush it off by explaining I have a lot on mind, like, I got important things. I'm thinking about important things, But instead I said, "Oh, you think that's funny? Wait until I can't remember your name and see how funny that is." And listen, I don't want to trivialize that. I know that's a real thing, and it's not funny when you're living through it. But my point is this, none of us, there was a day when I never would have thought. And I think this is true. None of us think that we'll ever need crutches, or for that matter, a walker, as long as we're healthy, right? As long as everything's going okay, as long as we don't have any serious troubles, and there's not struggles or challenges, as long as everything's going as planned. And when we find ourselves in a season where the way forward is filled with a lot of uncertainty and we're just not sure how we're going to go forward, that's the time we start to think a little bit more about all this. And then it's, okay, now what do I do? It's then, okay, what do I really believe in? What is it that I'm leaning on? What am I trusting in? I was reading an article, and I think this article's been around for a couple years anyway because it predates COVID. But I was reading an article by Daniel Gilbert. He was a psychology professor at Harvard University. He wrote an article called "What You Don't Know Makes You Nervous." Right? What you don't know makes you nervous. And he did a bunch of research, and this was pre-COVID, pre-inflation, and here was the conclusion of the article. He said here's the way he said it, Americans are smiling less, worrying more, and than they were a year ago. And he says happiness is down, sadness is up, and we're getting less sleep. He said we're actually smoking more cigarettes and depression is on the rise. And then he went on to explain that for most people, if you ask them, why is that? Why is it that the general mood or spirit of the world is kind of spiraling downward in the world that we live? He said most people would say that the reason for that is the economy. Most people would attribute to financial stress or personal relationship problems. But he says, to be clear, it's not about finances and it's not about relationships. It's about uncertainty. It's about uncertainty. And he talks about this experiment where they separated volunteers into two groups, and in one group of volunteers, that group was going to receive 20 intense electric shocks. I don't know who volunteers for those. We can't get people to volunteer for the nursery, but they got people to volunteer to get shocked. But anyway, that's one group, okay? And they have one group that gets 20 electric shocks, okay? And then they had a second group of volunteers, and they're told they're only going to get 3 of these intense shocks. But the difference between the two groups is that the group one that's getting 20 electric shocks, they know when the shocks are coming. They're told when they're coming. But group 2, who gets only 3 of these same shocks, they don't know. They don't know when it's going to happen, okay? And what they determined in this experiment is that those who received only 3 shocks actually had more psychological pain. They had more side effects, suffering, rapid heartbeat, perspiration than those that received the 20. And the reason was because they didn't know. They didn't know when it was coming. I mean, it wasn't about what was actually going to happen to them. It was about the uncertainty of when it was going to happen to them. And I just feel like that's the season we've been in for some time now, here on planet Earth, United States of America, where we're all bracing ourselves, wondering if another shock is coming. Like, we realize that people throughout human history, when you step back and take a look, there have been people through human history that have gone much worse than what we have gone through, and we realize that. It's not necessarily the shocks, okay? It's that we weren't ready for them, and we don't know what's coming next. And it just seems to be one thing. First it was the economic downturn of 2008, and then the pandemic, and now it's an inflationary train wreck, and what's next? So in this final discourse of Jesus, he's preparing his followers for the shocks that are going to come next, okay? And he talks to them directly about the fact that they can expect this, okay? Now listen closely. He talks to them about they can expect this. Okay? This is what you can expect. So, and we're going to get into that later, but so in this message, he gives them 2 things that seem to contradict one another. He says, in this world, you will have trouble. And then he says, but don't let your hearts be troubled. You put those 2 things together and you get, don't let trouble trouble you. In other words, don't let uncertainty make you uncertain. Well, how's that possible, Jesus? And his answer is, real simple. Believe in me. That's how. You believe in me. And for the disciples, well, they had been following Jesus everywhere, and they knew they could believe in him. They knew they could trust in him, because like they were in this boat one time, and he spoke a word to the storm, and the wind and the waves, they obeyed him. Okay, and they were there when the demons cowered in fear at the mention of Jesus' name. And they were there at the graveside when Lazarus was dead and buried, and they were witnesses when he walked out of his own grave. So they believed in him. They trusted in him. And so Jesus reminds them, hey, you know me, and you know you can count on me. In this world, you will have trouble, but don't let your heart be troubled. In this world, there's a lot of uncertainty, but don't let that make you uncertain. Now listen, church family. There may be many here who think, yeah, I believe, I trust in God, okay, I believe. But deep down from time to time, it's not uncommon to kind of admit to ourselves, well, I think I believe. But how does one really know until the time comes? And I think that's true for most of us. I know we're post-coronavirus these days, and it's fast becoming a past memory, and I think that's a shame. But for me and probably many of you as well, there was a pretty good test. That was a pretty good test as to what we believe, okay? Because in those days of uncertainty, there was a very real sense that many of us may have discovered just how much we truly believe. And look, I've shared my own personal testimony before on this, but I believe that time of uncertainty was a true testing time. And if you find yourself in uncertain times today, I know there's a sense in which me saying to you that the solution is believe in Jesus, trust in Jesus, there's a sense in which that doesn't seem very satisfying because, I mean, depending on your background, that might feel a little bit patronizing. I know that. But I also know that most of us want to put our weight on something that's a little bit more concrete, something that's a little bit more tangible. But if your heart is troubled for whatever reason today, I mean, I would just ask you to not throw this away, but to really just ask yourself, what do I really believe in? What do I really trust in? You see, that time of Corona was a real blessing to me personally because I discovered something about myself then, and what I discovered is that I believe. Because one of God's great blessings to me in that season of Corona, when I thought I had it like week one, and I've been told millions of people are going to die, is that I discovered I really believe this stuff. I mean, I asked myself, do you believe it or don't you? And I discovered that I really believe what I believe. Because in a very real sense, you don't really know what you believe or what you think you believe until those beliefs are tested. And before all that, I believed, but now I know I believe. Okay? Before all this, I believed my hope was in Jesus, but now I know my hope is in Jesus. Before all this, I believed, but now I know I believe. So here's the question, and it's a hard one to answer, make no mistake. But I will tell you from experience, it's just really worth, wrestling with this question. Do you really believe what you believe? Do you really believe what you believe? Most of us just have a number of beliefs that we feel sincere about, or at least we thought we were sincere about them, but the truth is that doesn't necessarily mean you really are. It doesn't mean you really believe it. And I'm not trying to turn this into a bad thing at all or put doubt in your mind. I would just say that all of us have some beliefs that we don't really believe. Okay, for instance, I thought about, I did this in a class years ago. I forget what it was called. But anyway, it's one that's easy to tell. Like I think all of us would say, maybe not all of us, but most of us would say, I believe that a healthy diet is important. Anybody believe that? Go ahead. Yeah, okay, yeah. Most of us would say, yeah, we believe that. Like Mountain Dew's bad for me. You believe that? Yeah. How many of you drink Mountain Dew? You don't really believe it then. You just think you believe it. Okay. Okay, so most of us would say, see, you're like, oh yeah, I believe in a healthy diet. You drink Mountain Dew? Yeah, dentist tell you need to stop that? It's bad for your teeth? He didn't? You need to get a new dentist. Okay, so yeah, most of us would say we believe in that, okay? But if we don't change our diet and we don't eat healthy, then do we really believe it? You maybe think, well, we should believe it, but don't really, not yet, right? I mean, there's actually a term for this, and it's called incongruent values. The simple thing is you say one thing and you do another. You say you believe one thing and you do the other, okay? And when the Israelites did that all the time. Oh, we're going to obey God. No, we're not, right? And people are people, right? And when we do that, when we live that way, it causes all kinds of anxiety, and it raises the level of fear in our lives. So let me read something to you. This is from the American Heart Association talking about how to relieve stress in your life. Anybody need to get rid of stress in their life? Okay, yeah. Here's what they say. This is the American Heart Association. They say, it's very simple. To relieve stress, examine your values, and then live by them. Pretty simple, right? Examine your values. And the Bible said it once, just make up your mind about whether to eat it or not and then do it. And don't get all worked up about it, right? Remember that? Jesus said. Some people think you should need to meet. Some people think you should. Just make up your mind and do that. Quit worrying about it, right? In other words, the more your actions reflect your beliefs, the better you're going to feel. So bottom line, if you truly believe in Jesus, then live it, okay? I mean, live it like it's true. So if you believe in Jesus, when you feel overwhelmed with concern for your physical health, remember, you believe in Jesus. When you're convinced that there's no good outcome in the election and you feel hopeless, just remember that you don't believe that government's going to save you. You believe in Jesus, okay? When you feel your financial situation is insecure and you feel vulnerable and the economy is volatile, remember that you believe in Jesus. Remember that you are dependent upon him. Remember that he is the one that we lean on. So just ask yourself, do I really believe what I believe? And I'm just telling you, I believe it. I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. I believe that God's mercy will rain down, and one day lonely and brokenhearted people will experience comfort and peace. I believe that one day there'll be no more sorrow, no more suffering, no more pain. I really believe that, okay? I believe that God is the God who goes before us, and there's nothing that surprises him, and there's nothing that's going to catch him off guard. He won't be caught off guard by anything, and the things that are unfolding in this world are according to his plan. I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. I believe that he will heal, and one day the crippled will walk and the blind will see. I believe in Jesus. I believe that his grace is so sufficient that it's always enough. It's always enough. I believe in Jesus, and I believe that he gives forgiveness to the guilty and he sets the captives free. I believe in him. I believe his love can soften any heart. I believe that Jesus can redeem anything. I believe that there's nothing so broken that he can't make it beautiful again. And I know there's trouble, but I'm not troubled. And I know there are things that are uncertain, but I am not uncertain. And I'm putting all my weight on him. And now, before we close, as the disciples, they kind of need to get back to them. To help the disciples not have trouble in their hearts, Jesus tells them, believe in me. And then in verse 2, and that's all the verses we're going to do today. In verse 2, Jesus says, in my Father's, we sang about it. In my Father's house, there are many rooms. If it were not so, I'd have told you. I'm going there. Why is he going there, church? A place for who? For us. Yeah. And so as we begin this discourse, Jesus says there are two things that you need to believe to find peace when you're troubled. And it's real simple, but it's hard to do. You need to believe who you know. Like you need to believe who you know, and you need to believe where you'll go. And one of those two things, well, both of them, covers it all, right? In other words, you need to believe in Jesus, and you need to believe and have confidence that he's going to prepare a place for you. You believe that? Then what you worried about? Right? For this is the way. Now, next week, if you want to prepare yourself, and I really hope you do. I know we get in the habit of we come in and what's he got this week? Well, I'm telling you, we're going to be doing John 14 for a while. Okay, so next week, just read ahead, particularly John 14:6, where Jesus is going to say, again, this is the way. In fact, he's going to teach that this way is the only way. Okay? So, but for today, let me close today with this challenge from Jesus. And the challenge is to take these first few words of Jesus in John 14:1 and let these words set the course of your path this week. This is the way you go this week, and every week, but this week. Focus on it this week. Don't let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in Jesus. And all God's people said,